anyways, hi everyone. Hope you guys are doing well. I'm Mrina Sugosh. I'm a developer advocate and DevRel manager at CKEditor. I started my career off at IBM Cloud, and then I moved into developer marketing at DigitalOcean. It's another cloud-based company. Some of you might have heard of it. And then I moved into CKEditor. So that's kind of my journey. And if you are not interested in any of that, there's a cute dog over there. That's my dog. And I also love to travel. So recently with our team, I have a team member over there. Hello, Goksha. We actually went to Krka National Park. So if you want to talk to me about travel, some cool things to do around Croatia, happy to chat about that after. All right, let me get to this talk and why so many of you are here. So I admit, I don't think I fully understand TypeScript when I started coding in TypeScript. And I kind of just went with the flow. I said, hey, I'm adding types to all of these variables. Looks pretty interesting. Let's go with it. And then I used it regularly, right? Mind you, I've been using it for like 3 to 4 years. And there were times where I didn't really understand it. So what happened? I encountered a problem, just like everyone here might have done. How many of you are developers here? Nice. How many of you are front-end developers? Okay, awesome. So, we've all run into these front-end bugs, especially with JavaScript, where we have no idea what this object does, or sometimes you get an object back and you don't know what the data inside the object is. And that's where I realized, that's where TypeScript really comes in and there's a power to it. So the situation, I was stuck fixing a bug in my code where I had no idea how to debug it. Then I reached out to my colleague, Philip, who is an expert in TypeScript. He actually helped me debug this. And he made the suggestion. He was like, try to use this word called satisfies on this object, and on this type object, and it should fix your problem. I used the word, and believe it or not, that problem went away. And I had no idea why. How many of us have been in that situation before? Come on, there's more than that. There's more than that. All right. So when Philip mentioned satisfies, I said, what is satisfies? I, of course, didn't tell it to him because as developers, we all have the ego. But I thought it to myself. I said, what is satisfies? Why haven't I heard of it before? And why have I just been directly typing some of my objects? So then, when I was doing that, I was on Twitter, just like some of my fellow developers are, and I came across this tweet. And in this tweet, they actually mentioned that, hey, I don't understand TypeScript. Like, you can't just run a TypeScript file. Why can't I just run it? What's the point of a scripting lineage if I need to init a whole directory and project? And I was like, you know what? That's how I feel. That's how I've always felt with TypeScript. And I didn't really understand why I was doing what I was doing with TypeScript. Because I started off with JavaScript, and I've always kind of had that mindset. So let's talk basics, right? Then I decided to dive into TypeScript basics. I said, okay, let me understand this from the ground up. What are the basics? What really happens here? So what is TypeScript? This is what the official definition sort of is. It's a superset of JavaScript. Anyone actually has some sort? Yes, I'm going to make some of your developers talk to me so that I'm not alone. But does anyone have ideas on what they would call TypeScript? Come on, I saw those front-end hand raises. Someone? Any volunteers? Okay. Well, I would say TypeScript is just a special version of JavaScript with some extra features like types, right? In a sense, you can actually call it JavaScript plus even. And why do you use typeset? Well, if TypeScript is so similar to JavaScript, why use it? Why not just use JavaScript? And I came across these 3 things that we're going to be talking about later, which is 3 main things that TypeScript really helps you as a developer. It's going to help you catch errors before you even create those errors. It's going to help you improve your code quality. And then finally, it's going to be better for the tools that you use. So if you write and use TypeScript correctly, for example, if you use it in VS Code correctly, it's actually going to improve your experience while you're coding. And that was actually really, really eye-opening for me, that VS Code reacts differently to the way you write TypeScript. And this might, of course, change, but all right. So let's go back to fundamentals. I really like the basics, don't I? So how does JavaScript run? The simple answer, and I know there's more complex layers to it, and we can talk about that all day, but the simple answer is it's known as a scripting language, which means it literally runs line by line. It's like following a recipe, basically. So whether it's Node.js, whether it's JavaScript on the browser, that's essentially what it does. So here's this cool GIF that I found online. I did not make this on my own. ChatGPT actually pointed me to this GIF. So fun fact. But yeah, I found this GIF online, and it basically runs you through how JavaScript computes in the backend, which is you have a variable, a equals to, you have another variable that you assign, then it gets stored in memory, and then you define some, you compute it, then it gets stored in the memory, and then you print, and that gets printed to your console. Great. That's how JavaScript works. Well then, what's different about it from TypeScript? Well, how TypeScript essentially, fundamentally runs, and I'm sure there's other layers to it, but it essentially compiles whatever you give it into JavaScript. And I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted to hear today. So here's an example of me typing some code in VS Code. It's the same JavaScript thing in TypeScript. So let's just wait for it for a second to go back to the start. Have same numbers, they're assigned, there's a total, and then I print it to the console, I compile it, and then I get a JavaScript file back. So that's essentially and fundamentally how it works. You basically write some TypeScript code, you're always compiling it into JavaScript, so whatever you write actually just gets converted into JavaScript, and then it gets run in the browser. Fundamentally, that's what's happening behind the scenes no matter what you're typing. All right, so for those of you who didn't raise your hands as a developer, and I added these 2 slides literally last minute, because I realized I was actually talking to a lot of high school students and teachers here. So if you've never heard of compilation before, this is sort of for you. It's similar to translation. Essentially, imagine if you're speaking English and everyone understands English to a certain degree. I'm talking in English, right? Just assuming. And JavaScript is like speaking English to most people. Most people understand it. Most browsers understand it. But then we're in Croatia. Maybe you want to write something beautiful in Croatian. TypeScript is like Croatian. You write something beautiful, but you still need to compile it and translate it into English so that people can read. So that translation step is what compilation is. It's the simplest way I could think of breaking it down earlier today. I hope that analogy helps some of you who are very kind of entry-level devs. All right, so we've talked about TypeScript becoming JavaScript. That's great, but then, okay, this feels like I'm just writing 2 pieces of code. Still, what's the point? What's the point of having types? Well, let's talk about types. Types, how many people have coded in like C and Java before? Okay, a good number of people. So some people are used to types already, right? Some of us aren't if we started in JavaScript, but some of us are. And I started, I would say, like my career back in the day in C++, if anyone still remembers that. And basically what type is for a computer to understand or categorize a specific type of data, whether if it's a number or an integer, then it's 4, 3.14, all of that is numbers. Then you have strings, which is pieces of text. And then you have Boolean variables. Remember computer science, 0, 1, true, false. That's a type. And the idea of types is, it came into programming languages history lesson back in the day so that people don't make mistakes when they're coding. And we somehow moved away from it and created JavaScript. And then we moved back to it and said, no, people are still making mistakes. And we started adding types to our variables. So a simple example, if you don't know JavaScript or TypeScript, simple example, you might have seen something like this, const message or let message equals hello world. Great. In TypeScript, this is going to look like the same thing. If you compile it, that's how it's going to look like in JavaScript. But it essentially is just message, type string, colon string. That's how you do it, hello world. So it's the same thing. It actually just gets compiled back into that. So if you run TSC, If you put this into a TypeScript file, run TSE, you'll see that's the output you get. So that's really what is happening in the back end. So if you understand JavaScript, you most likely can write in TypeScript. So now let's go back to satisfies, right? This whole talk, the genesis of this entire talk started because I didn't understand the word satisfies. So what is satisfies? Satisfies is it's called a keyword in TypeScript. It basically makes sure that your object fits a specific structure or pattern. That's like your official definition of it. And but what I'm gonna say is it's basically taking this JavaScript object and it's stating exactly what the data you expect should be. So for example, if you have an object with type ID, number, string name, string email, and so on and so forth, that's exactly what you should expect. And if you get anything more or less, then it's gonna flag, especially if you get anything more, or if you misspell something. So it really just makes sure that whatever data you're expecting, whether it's from an API or you're passing data back, that data fits that structure. So it's making sure that puzzle piece actually fits into whatever you're putting that into. All right, so yeah, I also put the point in case I forgot to mention puzzle piece. But I really love this animation because it actually made me understand that, okay, satisfies is really important for this. So let's walk through an example. Let's build a form together. I'm not live coding because I've had mixed experiences with internet in the past, but I'm gonna walk through screenshots of something I wrote. So we're gonna take a very simple feedback form. We've all tried to make some of this. It's pretty simple. There's a name, there's an age, and there's feedback, okay? And I'm gonna say name is going to be a string. Age, for the sake of difference, I'm gonna say it's gonna be a number, I'm gonna call feedback a string as well because it's most likely gonna be text or all the time. Unless someone puts emojis, then we'll think of a different way to deal with that. Yeah, so the type definition, this object, is going to look like this. This is how we would define feedback, right? That object. I'm gonna define it as name, string, age is number, description, string. Very cool. So the object initialization. Typically, this is how I was doing it before satisfies. I said, hey, create an instance of feedback, basically, type feedback, with all of this. This actually works. There's nothing wrong with this. Let me clarify. This works, and this worked for most use cases that I had. But what happens is that sometimes, just sometimes, and in the rare instances, editors actually get confused by the methods. They're not sure which method fits into which object because it doesn't understand that feedback needs to satisfy the feedback type, this feedback one instance. The second thing I understood is that if I don't use the word satisfies, again, sometimes editors or even when it's compiling, it doesn't really help me prevent errors or avoid mistakes while initializing the object. I think sometimes VS Code has gotten a little smarter in the past few months, but even then, there are times where it misses that. Once I tried experimenting by saying feedback.name with 2 E's, I'll show you that, that sort of screenshot later, and it didn't catch that the first time around. And the third thing is there's access property checking of objects. So if you're coding in JavaScript, and I'm sure a lot of you have done this if you're creating a form, you are constantly checking, is name type string? Is something that this user inputted a type that I can actually handle? And that's excessive type checking in my opinion. You shouldn't have to check if every single field in the form is something that is actually valid. And that's why TypeScript is pretty great. Okay, let's go with the first one. The first issue, the issue with methods, as I'm gonna call this, which basically means sometimes VS Code, I also tried this on other editors, but I really use VS Code on a day-to-day basis. So it was very weird because I tried to use a string method in the first line. Then the second line so I said feedback1.name.to uppercase, that should work. And then I said feedback1.age, and then it gave me a list of options for methods that are for strings. This has nothing to do with an integer. Although if you remember a few slides ago, age is a number. So that should not have been the recommendation. So that's what happened. And I decided after Philippe's feedback on, well, this wasn't the main error, but I had a few other errors with my object. I rewrote this as satisfies feedback. And believe it or not, as soon as I did that, in VS Code, feedback1.age, it started recognizing it as a number. Simple, just using the keyword satisfies instead of saying colon the type changed everything for me in TypeScript. So just knowing those kind of quirks and nuances is really important, but it's also like great because my experience with the editor is so intuitive. Second thing that TypeScript really helps is avoiding mistakes. The typo problem, as I call it. How many of us have done live coding or just coding in general and made typos? Okay, how many of us have texted and made typos? Come on. All right, thank you. I know people don't want to participate today, but come on, it's still the afternoon. All right, so I've done this several times, accidentally left my hand on that E too long, and I've ended up writing name Alice or something like that. And what happens is sometimes you might not catch this. VS Code, ESLint, or TSLint, and all of those things, they'll catch these things, but because you have it in TypeScript, you can actually know that the thing that you're expecting is a type name. So imagine if you had this in JavaScript and you didn't have this satisfies feedback, or you didn't have a type at all, you would never catch this error until it's in, well, not production necessarily. Hopefully you're not deploying to production, but until you run the code. So typing is extremely important for things like this, where you can accidentally write property names and miswrite them. All right, finally, access property checking. Always build it in rather than bolt it on. That's sort of like a philosophy of mine, which is with any sort of experience. A lot of you said you guys are front-end developers or full-stack developers. So how many of you have gone through sort of a switch case or an if case or whatever case it is to sort of check if, especially if you're coding in JavaScript, if the input is the type that you expected? How many of you have experienced security vulnerabilities because of that? Yeah, there's a few. We work with, so I work with CKEditor, and this is not a plug for CKEditor, so maybe I'll say this way. I work for rich text editors company, and in a rich text editing company, you basically have to type in code. And there's a lot of security vulnerabilities when you're taking any sort of input. So you really need to make sure that your input is not, is not like an unexpected type. So you're doing input sanitization and all of that regularly. It can be done with JavaScript, but it's also, you don't, on top of all of your security checks, you don't want to be doing type checks. Imagine you have a form, like let's say you're building something for a government agency or even a legal agency, healthcare agency. You don't want to be sitting there checking if someone typed their name and, or put in a number instead of a string, or put in a string instead of a number. You really don't want to be doing those things. You really should be getting exactly what you typed in. And that's what TypeScript kind of helps you do out of the box. You're going to be able to catch errors right then and there. So let's do an example of access property. So instead of an input form, let's say you as a developer, you realize that you want this new feature. It's called isSuperUser, right? We remember this whole thing started with a feedback form. So sometimes you want to know if this person gives feedback all the time. Are they a super user of your product? So maybe you add that to this object type. But then what you realize is in regular JavaScript, you should be able to do this. But in TypeScript, if you do that, it's going to throw an error saying super user doesn't exist in feedback type because we never added it and initialized it in the type. So in order to do that, this kind of catches the error for you as a developer. While you might pass all of these information in, it's not valid until, you actually add it back to your type and make sure that all of your data and object aligns everywhere in your stack. So that's essentially the sort of three big things on why TypeScript really matters. Just imagine if you have a huge, large-scale application, and this feedback object is pretty big. This can save you a lot of dev time and just a lot of embarrassment sometimes when things go to like staging or prod. All right, finally, why this matters. I think it goes back to the three things. You want to avoid errors proactively as developers. You want to understand the fundamentals of what you're doing. Almost everything these days are moving to TypeScript. In fact, our editor, we moved it to TypeScript for, I think it took almost like a year, but we did the move because it really helps our developers, you know, be on top of their game when they're coding in these large projects, open source projects, and things like that. So whether you're working with others, whether you're working on large projects, it's extremely important. And I think it makes me more confident in putting my code out there because I know that it's typed and the basic errors are caught a lot earlier on. All right, if you guys don't use TypeScript, I know there's actually a surprising number of hands in the room. Here are some basic resources. I would always start with the main website, the official TypeScript website. Check it out, learn from it, check out the docs. There's a lot of useful information on there. There's a lot of online tutorials, and they're free. Code Academy, free Code Camp, and my favorite, YouTube. Like, it's very underrated, but watching someone code is the best way to learn how to code. And finally, community forums, Stack Overflow, Reddit, and now our new favorite, AI assistants. Don't hesitate to use AI assistants to help you learn to code. They can also help you catch bugs. It's a great pair programmer. It's only going to help you get better as a developer as well. And maybe it will also suggest keywords like satisfies to you that you never knew existed in TypeScript. All right, I think I have 5 more minutes, and somehow I did this on time, so good for me. Any questions? Oh, wow. A silent room. That means I did my job well. All right, thank you so much for staying back for my section. I'll take a selfie with you all, so please do stay put. If you want to stand up, that would be great. But thank you so much. I'm Mrina Sugosh. I will be at the CKEditor booth as well as the after parties and all of that for the rest of the conference. I hope to catch some of you. Please feel free to come and talk to me. And I hope I can learn some things from you too. Thank you.